Please keep your systems muted. Let's see.
Joining the call.
I'm sorry?
Ms. Woods is just joining in, so we have a quorum.
Okay. So I'm gonna just mention at the beginning of the meeting, I personally am gonna have to, I don't expect that we're gonna go past 3:45, but in the event we do, I will have a personal hard stop. If we do go that far, then Vice Chair Gina Womack will take over the meeting. But my hope is that we will be done well before then. That's certainly the plan and intention, but we want to give an opportunity for public comments, and some of these discussions and conversations may go a little bit longer than intended, but I just wanted to mention that at the beginning of the meeting. We're going to go a little bit out of order based on what you all have before you from an agenda standpoint, because one of the presenters on the Raise the Age they also have a hard stop where they need to jump off. So there is a portion of the agenda where we're going to discuss a little bit about Raise the Age and its impact here in the state, as well as elsewhere in other states, as we talk about juvenile jail size and how we go forward as a state. So with that, I'm just going to jump a little bit out of order to get the meeting kicked off. And I believe with the New York Youth Justice Agency, Felipe Franco is listed. I think we're going to have Dana Kaplan to present.
Yes.
And I didn't know we were going to have Dana. Dana is someone who she and I actually go way back on some of this work. So I was really excited when I heard that you will be presenting. So thank you so much.
I am very excited to be presenting. I have been to many meetings of this commission when living in Louisiana and working on juvenile justice issues. And the work that you all are doing is so important, and it's so critical to see that it is continuing. And I'm just very appreciative to see such a great new level of leadership taking on this task. And I will say that Felipe and I have worked very, very closely together on New York City's Raise the Age implementation. And when he reached out to me last night and said that he had an unavoidable conflict and asked that I would step in, I was like, Louisiana juvenile, absolutely, absolutely. I would happily do it. So thank you for being accommodating of my schedule, just so that we could make it work on both ends. And should I just, I guess without further ado, let me just try to share my screen. And I can walk you all through the Raise the Age implementation that we did in New York City. So for people who don't know me, and I'll just introduce what my current role is. My name is Dana Kaplan, and I had spent many years working with a number of folks on this commission as the executive director of the Juvenile Justice Project of Louisiana. I am now at the New York City Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice and have been here for the last, I guess, 7 or so years. One of the key initiatives that I have been working on in New York City was our implementation of the Raise the Age legislation in New York. And so I'll speak mainly about New York City's efforts. We are a pretty significant part of the state story overall. And so I'll say, interestingly, the story of what has happened in New York City is not that distinct from what's happened in the state overall, but obviously happy to speak to any differences. So just a little bit of background, as each state has implemented Raise the Age, it's a little bit different. In New York State, the key components of the law were that the vast majority of cases of 16 and 17-year-olds will be heard in family court. It did also, and those cases would be processed according to existing juvenile delinquency laws. The Raise the Age legislation did create a new youth part of the adult criminal courts, where for certain offenses, they would be subject to not the adult sentencing structure, but a different level of consideration. So we kind of have created a little bit of a bifurcated system in New York State, which, speaking frankly, has posed its own challenges for sure. So our Raise the Age legislation went into effect in 2 phases. One was for 16-year-olds who went into an effect on October 1st, 2018. And then 17-year-olds were phased in October 1st, 2019. So obviously now we have a few years behind us in terms of, now really being in the full stage of implementation of Raise the Age and understanding what, its impacts have been in New York State and New York City. And as I said, all felonies start in a newly created criminal court youth part. And we have just a slightly bifurcated system. So when the Raise the Age legislation passed, I'll say we had a very, very short timeline for implementation. And I know that the question around timeline has been a huge question for many jurisdictions around the country. I think we had 18 months for the full implementation. And just speaking frankly, a number of our city agencies thought that that was insufficient time to accomplish it, but that was the timeline that had been given to us by the legislature, and as such, we responded to it accordingly, and we were able to implement everything within that time frame. We pulled together a different kind of Raise the Age implementation task force, and we set forth a few key goals that we decided should inform all of our planning overall. One, that we operate a best-in-class juvenile justice system that ensures fair and just outcomes for children 17 years of age or younger without compromising public safety. 2, that we continue to safely reduce the detention, jail, and prison population and do not detain or incarcerate more people after Raise the Age takes effect than prior. And 3, that crime levels remain at historic lows. And I have to just say that as specifically as it relates to goal number 2, in terms of continuing to safely reduce the detention, jail, and prison population and not detain or incarcerate more people after Raise the Age takes effect than before, that was actually not a given for us, because one of the things that we looked at from a data perspective in New York was that while 16 and 17-year-olds were being treated as adults in our justice system, we also knew that we had made some significant reforms such that there were, the levels of detention for young adults across the board were going far down, and that the family court system did treat cases a little bit differently. And so if we had looked at just kind of what the consequence would have been of adding 16 and 17-year-olds to the family court system without making any other changes, it was clear that we would have had a significantly expanded number of people in detention across the state, and particularly in New York City. And so we essentially said that this was an opportunity not just to say, how do we move 16 and 17-year-olds into the juvenile justice system, but to really say, what are the changes that we need to make to ensure that we are not actually having any unexpected collateral consequences of detaining young people who otherwise would not have been detained, or impacting their effect in the system otherwise. So the task force that we put together comprised a number of different city agencies, Department of Probation, NYPD, the Administration of Children's Services, which runs our juvenile facilities, the Law Department, the courts, which are a state agency, but obviously we had significant involvement and participation from the juvenile and family court judges, the district attorneys. In New York City, we have 5 district attorneys alone. So there was certainly, need for a lot of sustained engagement at the city, state, and borough level. The public defenders, as well as labor, because, there was a lot of labor considerations in terms of, probation officers, the staff of the facilities themselves. I'll just say at high level, the court processes working group really focused on the overall system design and flow. The programming and diversion working group was really focused on what was the continuum of community-based strategies and programming that could minimize the use of detention and incarceration for children. So what were the types of programs that were not previously available that needed to become available? And also, how did we ensure that programs that had been designed for maybe 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds were as relevant for an older age group and cohort. Data analytics and the risk assessment instrument working group was really focused on modeling different scenarios. And as I said in the beginning, one of the things that we understood was if we just kind of said, okay, let's put 16 and 17-year-olds into the juvenile justice system and then allow the system to just basically function as it had, we might not actually achieve some of the intended goals of Raise the Age. And so what we really did, both with our own data and research and analytic teams, but also with some technical assistance from folks from the Annie E. Casey Foundation and other entities such as the Vera Institute of Justice, was we worked on looking at, what were the different changes and policy decisions that we had to make within the system, and how could we model different scenarios to understand what the consequences would be of diverting more cases at the point of arrest, and how that would lead to further assumptions down the line about the number of detention beds that would be required, and all of those different things. So the data analytics team, was very, very important in terms of both looking at the data we had and what we could understand could happen, but also in helping us actually plan proactively for the path that we wanted, rather than just assuming that, we would have kind of what some of the worst case scenarios were. And I'll say some of the worst case scenarios that we looked up at front anticipated that we would not have enough detention beds to serve this larger population. And we knew that given an 18-month timeline, it wasn't an option for us to develop new facilities. So really, we were working with what we had. So the data analytics and risk assessment instrument working group was very important in helping us determine if these are the resources available, what do we need to do to get there? And then finally, the facilities working group was focused on ensuring that children in custody in New York City were housed in safe, age-appropriate settings that fostered positive development and well-being. So our 16 and 17-year-olds had been housed on Rikers Island, a kind of notorious correctional facility in New York City that is slated to be closed. And we have 2 juvenile detention facilities in New York City. We also operate a number of the kind of close to home or equivalent of what would be the state OJJ facilities in Louisiana are operated by New York City as well. So we had a very limited number of facilities that we were working with. As I mentioned, and it was 2 facilities, Crossroads and Horizon. Given the timeline for the legislation, what we would have wanted in an ideal world, frankly, would have been to have both the opportunity to do a larger amount of renovation on the existing facilities or even replacement, to identify a 3rd facility for intake. We just didn't have that opportunity. We had 2 facilities of about 100 beds each. And so what we were looking at was what is the most amount of renovation that we can do to ensure maximum programming, recreation space, all of those things. but also what are the other types of changes that we needed to make sure that those were a safe environment. I will say that this is kind of a graph overall, just in terms of the incredible reductions that we have made in the juvenile justice system overall in New York City. And this goes back to 2007.
Miss Dana, your screen, can you share your screen? We can't see the
It's
graph.
not sharing anymore. Oops.
Yeah, I don't think we ever saw your screen, Dana,
Oh, really?
unfortunately. So when you mentioned the graph, I was gonna also jump in. You mentioned the graph. We're not able to see it.
I will see, let me.
Then we can forward the presentation afterwards as well.
Let me see if I can just, if I can't figure it out quickly, I'll just share the graph after I'll share because we're almost at the end. So maybe what I'll do is just share the PowerPoint afterwards so that folks can see it, and I'll just walk you through what the graphs say. Does that work?
Yes, that works.
Okay, great. So we have had, but helpful to know that you can't see it so that I can actually draw it out. But basically in 2007, we had 6,000 admissions to the juvenile detention system. That has gone down in 2018. That was at about 13,000. I'm sorry, 1,000. Yes, about, I'm looking at different, and this is why you all should be looking at the charts with me. The detention admissions went down from about 6,000 to 1,000. There was a slight increase in Raise the Age, but very, very, very minimal. And arrests have gone down consistently across the board as well. I will say that when I started work at the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice in 2014, we had close to 300 16 and 17-year-olds on a given day in Rikers Island and in detention. And right now we have 120 in April in 2021. Now 120 across the board. That is anyone who is 17 and under. So when we started our reforms, we had close to 300 16 and 17-year-olds alone. Right now, there are no more than 120 young people in detention across the board. So what we have seen, and I'll again follow up to send you all the charts of this, is that there has been a significant reduction in the number of young people who have been detained in New York City, even following the implementation of Raise the Age. And finally, I'll just say a few of the things that we did intentionally to plan for that is, and again, we looked at what was, we looked at what the data was telling us and said that we had to basically make targeted investments to change Raise the Age, to make Raise the Age effective, implemented as effectively as possible. We expanded pretrial diversion or supervised release for 16 and 17-year-olds to eliminate any charge restrictions and have smaller caseloads. We created bail expediting programs, in-court case expediting. We hired release expediters to do in-detention case review for adolescents and young adults. We expanded alternatives to incarceration, such as family therapy. We created intensive mentoring programs through our probation department and nonprofit providers. For our in-custody programming, we revised the job descriptions of our ACS staff so that they could become youth development specialists, in which we included higher salaries to basically be able to better recruit, and then retain staff and recognize the importance and the critical work that they did in these facilities. We revised the job descriptions so that they would be, more focused on youth development, and provided training, working with organizations such as Missouri, the youth institutes that I know that you all have worked with as well. We hired additional nonprofit providers to work in the facilities, including credible messenger and violence prevention specialists, as well as nonprofit providers to do reentry supports. And so we essentially did do a significant amount of investment in alternatives to incarceration, pretrial diversion, case expediting, and programming in the facilities. But the end result is that we have continued to see a much smaller system overall that has allowed us to operate with a new expanded juvenile population in just a smaller number of facilities, and to completely eliminate the housing of any young people on Rikers Island, but still stay within the existing juvenile facilities that we had. And that has been highly successful for New York City. I'll finally just say that obviously I could talk on and on about what the challenges have been, and I don't want to hide the fact that there were certainly bumps in the road, and we've had some, problems with court processing and problems with, the initial transfer of young people from Rikers to the facilities and hiring so many new staff at once. And so it certainly hasn't been without, its challenges for everyone involved. But at the end of the day, I think we're very, very proud of where we have come in New York City, and happy to share any amount of our lessons learned with anyone else that can benefit from that. And again, don't want to shy away from where it's been hard, but in some ways, the 18-month expedited timeframe really forced us to respond in a way that in many ways is probably better than it would have been otherwise. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dana, for that presentation. And obviously, we all know that there's much more to it and much more we can dive into. Do you have any time for questions?
Yep, I do.
I want to give an opportunity to anybody who's on a commission to ask Ms. Kaplan any questions if they might have related to her presentation. Gina, I'm going to give you an opportunity to just briefly mention why you thought it was important to have the discussion around raise the age. And this is just one piece of it. We're going to revisit this later in the meeting. We're going to have 2 other presentations on raise the age, but I do think it's important just to frame the context of why we're having this discussion, because some people might have been caught off guard and saying, well, why are we even discussing raise the age? Where does this even fit into anything we're even talking about as it relates to Louisiana and juvenile justice?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank you, Dana, for sharing. I definitely loved all the wonderful points that you made out, specifically regarding, you're glad you had the extra opportunity to be able to do something a little different than you may have, like taking the time to just renovate the facilities that you all have had, and you have less children now than you did during the raise the age. And it was really important to make sure you're able to have a community-based focus and work with folks that are in the community with the young people. We wanted to bring up again the raise the age. As I recall, Mr. Summers in his original response and presentation to the commission, we discussed the need to be able to accommodate the young people who might be returning from the adult system. And while we're still looking at rebuilding a facility, even smaller than the one that we have now, advocates really feel like it's still not necessary to spend the $26 million to rebuild the facility when and even accommodating raise the age didn't make it a necessity. So we just wanted to be able to revisit that and share what is happening in other places that are doing work that's successful with raise the age without the need to rebuild a new facility. And as Ms. Kaplan pointed out, it's really crucial that you have qualified staff. I love the fact that they restructured the positions for the folks working inside the facility. So being able to have other places that have implemented Raise the Age successfully without the need to rebuild new facilities, we thought was really crucial to the conversation. And so thank you again for the opportunity to share
Thank you.
that.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Gina. And again, this is part of a much larger conversation we're going to be having. Dana, again, we want to thank you for just all the work that you have done and all the work that you continue to do, and being willing to share your time and perspective on this call. We appreciate, and we look forward to continuing to work with you all to try to learn best practices in terms of how we can improve the way that we're doing things here in Louisiana. Not everybody has all the answers. I appreciate you pointing out the fact that it hasn't been a perfect road, because there is no perfect road. And we have to be willing to talk about the things that are working, but also the things that are not working when reforms are implemented. So just thank you for, again, taking that time. I know that there are going to probably be follow-up questions. So if you have a moment, maybe if you just want to drop your contact information in the thread for anybody who may have any follow-up questions for you or your organization, we would greatly appreciate it. Because I think you have to jump off pretty soon.
Yep, absolutely. So my contact information is shared, and you know, I think just you all hit on those points that, you know, the importance of the nonprofit community-based providers, both inside the facilities and, you know, outside in terms of the community programming was just key. The intentionality of planning towards that smaller population, which has allowed us to, and I think people have been pointing out in the chats, obviously, you know, how you know, significant it is that in a city of 8 million people, over 8.5 million people, that, you know, we have only 120 young people in detention on a given day is, you know, is notable, and it took a lot of effort to get us there. And yes, that, you know, we also, I think, like Louisiana, have, you know, some suboptimal facilities, but have been able to make some great progress even within that, just focusing on the programming piece and staff culture change, and really recognizing the importance of the job of facility staff and honoring that. So my contact information is included there. I will send the PowerPoint along so that that can be shared, and thank you all.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Dana.
Dana.
So as I mentioned, we took Ms. Kaplan a little out of order. We're going to get back to the regular agenda, if you will, and have some parent testimony from Ms. Latoya Porter. Is Ms. Porter on with us? Hey, Ms. Porter, I think you're on mute. Okay, there we go.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. The floor is yours. Feel free to share with us your perspective or any testimony that you think this commission needs to be aware of.
Okay, so first, thanks for inviting me. I hope everybody can hear me. My name is Latoya Porter. I currently am the Chief Leadership Officer for a psychiatric residential facility here in Louisiana. My son was in OJJ custody for almost 6 years. So I've had quite a bit of experience in dealing with, you know, OJJ and the process. And during that time frame, I've had the opportunity to really have a lot of concerns and things of that nature. I was very pleased to listen to the lady from New York and and how they are facilitating things. And I think it's definitely notable and commendable on how they're processing things with our juveniles. In my son's case, in my opinion, long before I became his mom, he was 12 years old. The system failed him. Children Protective Services failed him. in a major way. And I think that is the biggest key to handling our issues with our juvenile issues, is that having more of a preventative mindset in how we approach it. I became Trey John's mom when he was 12 years old. He is a month now out of OJJ custody, and he is 20 years old. He'll be 21. Was incarcerated when he was 14, and the process was one that was, in my opinion, was over prosecutorial, very biased. But even once we got into the juvenile justice system, I think that the part that was disheartening for me was that it was not as rehabilitative as we needed it to be, especially for a child that was sentenced to juvenile life. For stealing cars, I might add. A child that was not a violent child, that was not didn't have a long rap sheet, but could have benefited from one preventative measures long before he became involved with the juvenile justice system. I mean, we're talking about 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, a child that should have protected by Children's Protective Services, a child that should have had access to more community-based mental health services, that got involved into the juvenile justice system. And so even with all of those things being, failed, getting into the juvenile justice system, in my opinion, should have been something that was a catch. We've caught him now. He's 14. Now let's rehabilitate him. And so my experience was that when my son got into the juvenile justice system, place that, and this is not a knock to anyone who works there, but in my opinion, the worst place ever, which was Bridge City. It was not safe. I would have conversations with him and he would say things like, "Mom, you don't understand. I have to turn into an animal or I'm not going to survive here." And he was placed in Bridge City. The first year, I think that, he really went in there and he worked really hard. He got his GED, he graduated, he got some trades under his belt. I could see that he was really trying to come home. And as time progressed, when he would go before the judge, and every single time it was time for him to go home, when even OJJ themselves on 3 occasions would say to the judge, "We have rehabilitated him, as that anything beyond this point is punitive," and he's not released, you could just see the hope just completely leave from him. And it just got to the point to where, he would even say to me, I'm not going to leave her until I'm 21. They're not going to let me go. And that's just what it is. And so it wasn't a rehabilitative thing. It was a housing thing. It became a survival thing. A lot of the negative behaviors at that point, he picked up on a lot of the negative things. I don't think that he received the mental health services that he needed while he was there, and the communication from a parent that's not only in the mental health industry, but a parent that's involved, a parent that wants to know what's going on. It was just not there. I could remember having getting calls 10 minutes before the staffing that I never missed to say, "Hey, we were having the staffing, we need you to jump on." And I'm like, what the hell? You just called me. And so those types of things, you have to, and if you're going to incarcerate them, prepare them for when they go home, have appropriate discharging things in place, and have more of a rehabilitative program, instead of just something that is just housing them or just truly just locking them up like animals in cages. That experience. And this is coming from someone who works in mental illness. Like I work at a lockdown facility, and I think that the way that things are currently in our state, it's just a double negative. Like the system fails you first of all, it doesn't prepare you. It doesn't prepare you. It doesn't protect you. And then once you do what it is that, like in my son's case, he was failed to be protected by Children's Protective Services from a drug addicted mom, a drug dealing dad, missed school for months at a time. He should have been in the system a long time ago. But he got into the system only through criminal justice. And at that point, it should have been okay, now that we like a catch-all, we've caught him in the system, let's help him, let's rehabilitate him, prepare him, and put him back into the world. My son is 20 years old and he's home right now. He's been home a month. He had no idea how to get an ID. He does not grocery shop. He knows nothing because he has spent his whole entire adolescent years in OJJ's custody from age 14 until now. He's 20 years old and we're in the store and I'm trying to show him things about how to grocery shop, how to get your ID, how to do things that if in fact you're going to have these children incarcerated, you need to prepare them for when they're going to come home, or you're only releasing them back into the negative element that they came from. And I don't feel like my son was prepared for release. And the only reason that he was released is because he got involved in the adult system. That's the only way they let him go. 3 times OJJ went before the judge to say, anything further is punitive. 3 times. And 3 times, instead of using their power to actually say we're going to release him, they did not use that. They kept him incarcerated. And the only way that he was able to get out of jail was because he got involved. Because they began to look at him now as an adult. But you're a child in the head. You're in a children's facility. But now you are, because my son is a big kid. I mean, he's 6'5". So he's a really big kid, man. They're treating him as an adult. He's not physically aggressive, but he can be verbally aggressive. And so when he is treated and viewed as an adult, but he's locked in a facility with other children, there's an imbalance there. And so that is how he got released. He's home now. And it has been a challenge because he knows absolutely nothing. He was not prepared at all to be released, and neither were we. We didn't even know he was going to be released until 2 days before. And so I think that if in fact OJJ or the state is going to take on the responsibility of incarcerating our children, then our methods have to be protecting and preparing and preventing for when they come out, or we're just producing adult criminals. That is what we're doing. A son like a kid like my Trey John, if he will come home and he didn't have the support of a family who could go out and make sure he has an address and a home and someone that was involved to be able to support him, he would be back on the streets, selling drugs like he was doing when he was 10, 11, 12 to survive, because self-preservation kicks in at some point. And then we hold them accountable. And that is unfair because we, as the governing body of this state, we have not prepared them. We have not protected them. We have not put a priority on funding for community-based things, for true mental health. Most of the children that I have dealt with that are involved in the OJJ system that I've met through my son and through other parent organizations are kids that never needed incarceration. They needed mental health services, long-term mental health programming, whether that be residential or some other type of rehabilitative program, because the system that we have in place right now is a negative. You fail to protect them, you incarcerate them, and then you don't prepare them. So then they come home and they do the exact same thing, and now they're adult criminals. And so at some point, our legislation and our policymakers have to take a complete look at how to revamp the program, how to catch the kids on the front end. Like I said, I became Trey John's mom when he was 12, 13 years old. He should have been involved in Children's Protective Services long before that. He should have been even in the school systems. But worst case scenario, when you get to the point to where they have, committed a crime, and you have to get them involved in juvenile justice, it should be rehabilitative, and it should be something that if they're going to be in a program that takes them completely away from their parents, from their family, that is going to prepare them for when they get home. None of that happened. And then if you even begin to factor into COVID, it was a complete joke. A complete joke. You have these children on lockdown. They don't know what's going on. Their families don't know what's going on. You expect these kids with criminogenic behavior, mental health diagnosis to be locked in a dorm and behave. It is absolutely insanity. And then when they don't, kids like my son, Trey John, are charged now as an adult because OJJ no longer wants to deal with him. And that's exactly what happened in his case. He was charged as an adult, got sent over to the adult system, and that is how he was able to come home, because finally they let him go. But now here we are. We have a 20-year-old man, 6'4", and doesn't even know how to fill out a job application. But he's been in OJJ's custody since he was 14. That's a failure. That's a failure on OJJ's part.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. We really appreciate your testimony and being willing to share those personal accounts. Thank you for stepping in and being the caretaker of a young person who has been and is still in such great need. I really appreciate you taking that time and for all that you're doing for Trajan. Is there anybody on the commission who has any questions for Ms. Porter or any comments that they'd like to share? All right, seeing none, you hit on a lot of important pieces that I believe are all at the center of why this commission saw the need to begin meeting again. Everything from the holistic approaches and taking the comprehensive look and trying to give OJJ the resources that they need in order to be effective, because they are unfortunately a back-end agency. And how do we break that cycle? All of the points that you mentioned were right on target. You know, in many ways, you know, we are kind of like the choir that's hearing these cries, and that's a big reason as to why this commission has been reignited, and we're trying to reach some of the solutions to the problems that you pointed out from personal experience. So again, thank you so much, and we appreciate your engagement to further illustrate these challenges.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And just wanted to reiterate the story that you're sharing is definitely what we hear from a lot of families. Their children are put into the system to get the services that are necessary, which is definitely why we need to look at this from a holistic perspective, which is what the reforms that were put in place were set to do, right? Like look at what's happening from the public welfare side, the education piece, making sure that, you know, the services, like children shouldn't have to be incarcerated to get the mental health services and assistance that's necessary. So again, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. And we're definitely looking at working on this from a holistic perspective, from the front end to the, you know, so that children wouldn't even enter into the juvenile justice system.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and we hope that we can keep you engaged on this.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other. Okay. I ended up getting muted. If there are no other comments or questions on that piece we just heard from Ms. Porter, we're going to move to just a quick debrief on our recent tour. Just like it's important for us to have testimonies like the one we just heard from Ms. Porter, it's important for the commission and policymakers to understand at the most granular level the issues that we're trying to solve. So it was important for us to go on a tour. We went on a tour of Bridge City Youth Center recently to kind of get to see up close what's going on at one of the juvenile facilities here in the state. I want to thank OJJ and Bill Summers and his team for giving us that tour that we just recently went on. I have toured prisons before, but they have been all adult. I've been to Angola and several other adult facilities, but I had never been to juvenile facilities. I've been to the detention center in Orleans, but none of the state-run facilities like Bridge City. So for me, it was definitely very eye-opening, and it gave me a lot to reflect on, and it also reinforced the need for us to do the work that we're doing on this commission. Quite honestly, we have some serious challenges. Everything from just making sure that these children have the most up-to-date facilities, and that they're getting the right services, and that they're getting the right programming to try to avoid the challenges that Ms. Porter was talking about, that when these kids go in, we don't want them to come out worse off. We want them to come out better. That's supposed to be the whole point of the juvenile system. So for me, it was again, really eye-opening to see and to interact with some of the young people, to hear their stories, to hear their testimonies, and to hear some of what is good that's happening back there, but also to learn about the challenges that they're faced with, and how we can try to come up with some creative solutions in doing that. So I want to hear from some of the other commission members, to hear from you all what you all thought, what your takeaway was. Anybody want to get started? How about you, Mr. Pittman? I'm gonna just go ahead and volunteer you.
Oh, I echo.
Because you were first on my screen. You're the first person up on my screen.
I'm Richard Pittman. I'm with the Louisiana Public Defender Board. I'm the Director of Juvenile Defender Services. I echo what you said, thanking Mr. Summers and the staff there at OJJ for their hospitality. I think they were very good hosts. They showed us a lot. I don't think they showed us everything that was there, and I was impressed with the staff members that we met, and I was impressed with their attitude towards the work they were doing. I thought the facility itself was obviously pretty old and outdated, and left some things to be desired. I don't want to comment too much on the kids and their individual cases, but I was impressed with them, the ones we met. And I want to just call out the good intentions that I think the people have in this system, and they're trying to do their best, and I know that everybody has to have accountability in this system, including OJJ, including us. But I think that we need to acknowledge the intentions, and also acknowledge that intentions are not necessarily enough all the time. And I think those are the thoughts I have sitting here right now.
Thank you. And I know I kind of put you on the spot there, but I do appreciate it. You being willing to share your thoughts. I do echo what you mentioned about the facilities. I encourage anybody who hasn't been to go and see it. Go see these facilities if you can. You have to think about what a facility like that, of its age and conditions. And we went in one of the classrooms, and you think about the lighting and the windows, or the lack of windows, and how an environment can inspire a young person to improve their life. If the conditions that they're in don't set the tone for that, then how can we have an expectation for these young people to want to improve their lives? So just the environment is so crucial in ensuring that they're in a place where they feel the love that in many cases they never felt before. So that was another takeaway. Again, when I walked into one of those classrooms, I was just like, my God, like I don't know if this would be a place that I would want to learn anything, quite honestly. So that's something that we have to work on. And again, this is not being critical of any person or persons. but it's just pointing out the truth. It's just pointing out the facts. And we gotta improve these facilities for these young people to try to get some better outcomes. Are there any other members of the commission? Justice Griffin was there. Ms. Woods was there. Anybody else want to share their thoughts on the tour?
I'd like to share mine. My name is Tracy Woods. I am a representative from Southern University, and I had the benefit of this being my second visit to Bridge City. And as I echo all of your sentiments, Representative Duplessis, but I do have some concerns, as you stated, that things haven't changed much from my visit about 5 or 6 years ago. And there have not been major improvements for the facility, and that's kind of unsettling. I thought that after I'd come back, I would see some major improvements in the facilities and the services offered to the students, the incarcerated, as I call them, still students. And I'm just very concerned about their level of education and making sure that they are being provided with the level of educational services that they need. So those are still my ongoing concerns, and I enjoyed the visit. However, I enjoyed visiting with the students, but I'm still very concerned about the facility and the services.
Thank you, Ms. Woods. Anybody else from the commission would care to share their perspective on the tour?
If I I was going to wait and see if Justice Griffith had anything to say. If not, I could go.
No.
I mean, I found it. I too have been to Bridge City before. This was not my first attempt at visiting. However, my first time that I visited, I only got to the beautiful the place where they do worship, which is, I think, was like towards the end of our tour. And so that's where we met with the students when we were trying to do the African-American judges across the state did an event there when we had our conference one year. And, you know, I know that I was very conscious of the fact that they were trying to give us the positive, you know, very conscious of the fact that they were showing us the things that were good spins. I think that I did appreciate some of the honesty around some of the other issues that they discussed. I kind of wish I had heard from this mother prior to then, because I probably would have asked a few questions in light of some of the things that she has suggested, because I think she's correct. How do we incarcerate children during their most formative years and not work on not just educating the mind, but giving them life skills? And you know, the people there, and I saw Mr. Summers is here, and some other people are here on this call. I do have real concerns about whether or not we're truly conscious as a community and and as a society of what we need and what it takes to make sure that even as we incarcerate children who have done things that have forced them to be locked up, that we prepare them in a holistic way, not just mentally, because we do know they have the mental health needs, but also practically on how to do things. And I would love to see them do something along the lines of, you know, figuring out, you know, the things that you're really supposed to be putting in your body, you know, those kind of conversations, figuring out how do you get a license, how do you find employment, how do you do the things necessary to function as a person. And quite honestly, it's difficult for some people who don't get incarcerated to figure this stuff out. So I would think it's even more difficult for people who don't have support systems. And so we probably need to be more conscious of zoning in on those issues for them. And so I like I said, I knew what it was, and as Tracy talked about it, she was not surprised by the similarities of what she'd seen before, that a lot of things hadn't changed. I think there are efforts. I think it's difficult to figure out how do you make the changes necessary. And so that's one of the reasons I'm here, because I think you all experts have a better appreciation for what really needs to happen down the pipe. And thank you again, Gina, for setting it up.
Yeah, thank you very much, definitely for your comments. And, I echo like what folks have said, appreciation of OJJ for accommodating us and setting up the facilities tour. However, for me, I was less struck by the facility and more, taken with what was happening or not happening with the young people. And just like Justice Griffith said, and the mother said earlier, in regards to like vocational and learning and things that are more, that will be helpful for the young people to be able to re-enter to society. And so I definitely was concerned about the lack of hearing, being able to prepare young people to return home. And I've gone on enough facility tours to be able to look at young people and sort of get a read on how they're doing. And definitely you could see the young people were really trying to stay focused on, I feel like what they were shared to share. And that concerned me. The testimonies didn't seem as genuine as I would have hoped to be able to hear from young people. And so that's concerning to me. And I also was concerned and struck by the lack of transparency. And as Dana pointed out, and Mr. Summers did say, everything is not perfect, and we understand that. But from my vantage point, the point of this whole commission is to work with the stakeholders and understand what is happening, the good, and the otherwise, and the bad. And so we could figure out how to work together. And we are interested in making sure that the young people have the best rehabilitation supports that's necessary, but not only inside the facility, but also preparing the young people for their return home. And I was also concerned in regards to it seemed, and I didn't get a good understanding, but the number of personnel that comes from the adult system, right? I heard several times folks were saying, we did this in Angola and we're going to try it here. And that's hugely concerning to me because young people are very different from adults, and their services and their rehabilitation needs to mirror and definitely be something that is more beneficial for young folks. So it's hard to really get a gauge and know how we can be supportive if we don't have adults being transparent and honest about what the needs are. And definitely want to see more of how we can really work with the community, right? And have community-based services so that we're preparing the young people, again, to return home to their communities. So that definitely left me concerned. So I think that's just an area that this commission needs to focus on even more and understand what's really happening. I don't know if I just noticed this morning that there was an article that there was some additional attempts for young people escaping. And in my experience, young people are not trying to leave a situation that's working for them. So I also was really concerned about the young person that pulled the fire alarm. And I'd love to hear what has happened and how OJJ has worked to be more rehabilitative and hopefully not punitive. So hopefully we can do another tour really quickly to Swanson and really have an opportunity to talk to young people and hear from them truthfully without them being concerned about, retribution. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you all. I think from the commission standpoint, everyone who went on the tour has shared their thoughts, and I certainly echo all of that. The main piece I want to reiterate Gina, from Gina's last comment, and I'm speaking specifically to OJJ when I say this, that this is not an anti-OJJ initiative. This is a collaborative effort where we are working to identify and not just see the successes of OJJ, but to see what the struggles and the shortfalls and the challenges are, so that we can better assist and help, even if it's advocating for additional resources or introducing new policies that can help you all do your jobs better, because you are on the back end. And in order for us to fully understand that, we have to see the things that are not working, the more uncomfortable conversations that need to be had. We have to have them, and that's just a fact. And if we are only seeing or only being shown pieces that aren't as nice to look at, then it's harder for us to work in collaboration to solve this challenge. No one has ever suggested that the job you all have is easy. I think you all at OJJ have probably one of the most difficult challenges, and that's trying to find that balance, but with limited resources, with very limited resources, of trying to implement the necessary discipline that is required, but also the necessary and more emphasis on rehabilitation and giving these children the services that they need that they didn't get on the front end. But we have to have those difficult and often uncomfortable conversations. So just wanted to reiterate that. Again, for me, it was very eye-opening that I had just never been to that type of facility before. So I'm grateful for the tour, and I think it's going to prompt further dialogue, as it's already been said by other commission members, that you could just tell in some of the responses of the young people when you asked them about certain things. They were like, well, I just want to get out of here. As long as I'm out of here, then that's all that matters. I don't even care where I go. It's just like anywhere in the state, as long as the judge lets me out of here. That's concerning. So again, it's not a criticism, it's just a fact. And we got to be willing to have those kind of conversations. So anyhow, and with that, OJJ is on here. They will absolutely have an opportunity to share thoughts and follow up. Bill, I don't know if you want to take an opportunity now to speak to the tour, or if you want to wait until later in the meeting. I'll defer to you, and you sort of make your own decision on that.
No, I'm happy to talk now. I mean, whatever the commission needs me to do, I will do.
I tell you what I would like us to do. Let's just pause for now, and then we'll have it, because I imagine, just like in the last meeting, once OJJ gets going, the questions are going to come. So let's hold off for now.
Fine.
Let's revisit the other parts of the agenda, and once we get through that, then we'll have an opportunity to have a broader conversation around what's going on at OJJ and the path forward. How's that?
Certainly.
Yep. All right. So we started the meeting with a presentation from Dana Kaplan around raise the age. We did that a little bit out of order, and I mentioned that we would have two other presentations. We also have Marcy Mistret from the sentencing report and Savannah Felix with Cook County. I'm going to ask Marcy, if you're there, if you want to maybe get started, and then we'll go to Savannah to give your brief presentations on raise the age. We've already passed the hour mark. I would ask that if you can, try to keep them under 10 minutes each, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you for having me today, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I'm going to try to share the screen here and see if that works. And let's just say slides show. And okay. So I work at the Sentencing Project, but for many years before that, I was running an organization called the Campaign for Youth Justice, which is a national organization. And we were really looking at ways to remove children from the adult criminal justice system. And one of the initiatives that we were most known for was in supporting initiatives that raised the age of criminal responsibility in the states that had set it below the age of 18. So we just issued a report called Bringing More teens home, raising the age without expanding secure confinement. And we kind of did this as a follow-up to a report that came out in 2016, looking at kind of the first tier of states that did raise the age. So I'm just going to go through some of the findings quickly. And I think, Gina, I believe you shared the full report with folks. So the Raise the Age initiative overall has been incredibly successful. And that is really important to note because it was met with great resistance. The initiative now has been going on for well over a decade. Connecticut, as you can see here, was the first state to do so. They brought 16 and 17-year-olds back under juvenile jurisdiction. They were the first state to raise the age. They just had their 10-year anniversary in 2020, and their outcomes have been incredible. They actually have closed a detention center and closed their only youth commitment center in Connecticut, and they just passed a law to bring children that are charged as adults back from their young adult facility. So that's kind of where we started, and they set the tone. That was followed by Illinois, and then Mississippi, Massachusetts. You can go on, and Louisiana was about halfway through the middle here, and one of the states that brought 17-year-olds back. But altogether, these initiatives have returned more than 100,000 children a year back under the juvenile court supervision, which is really, really important in terms of some of the things I've heard other people mention today with making sure that children and their families have the supports they need, a focus on rehabilitation, opportunities to seal or expunge their record, privacy, so their information is not in the public realm while they're going through services, etc. The report that we just wrote, you can see here, these are the states that have raised the age. Those who have closed secure commitment facilities include Connecticut and Illinois. Illinois has closed 3 facilities since they raised the age. Michigan and Missouri, Michigan actually hasn't implemented their law, but their bill, the funding does not include any new commitment or secure beds. Same thing in Missouri. They've only been implementing for a couple months there. New York, you heard very eloquently from Dana earlier, and New York City is a little bit different. They did open a couple state facilities, commitment facilities for young people. I do want to note they brought 16 and 17-year-olds back. That used to be under both the youth system. It was those facilities were co-run by people who work for the youth system and the adult system. That has now been returned fully under youth system, and so all of the staffing is only only staff that has been trained in youth development, adolescent development. And the other big shift this year with New York is they were paying for 100% of the beds, whether they were used or not. And by this year, they said, we're not doing that. We'll pay on a per diem, because they had about 10 kids in the facilities and they were paying for many more beds than that. So, again, that's a pretty recent reform. Same thing with Massachusetts. They went up to 62 beds and are down to 40 beds. New Hampshire has 1 state commitment facility that is slot for to be closed by 2022, I believe. And then that leaves Louisiana and North Carolina that are both talking about opening new facilities. And I want to quickly just say North Carolina brought back 16 and 17-year-olds. The number of 16 and 17-year-olds that they have in their state is almost double what Louisiana has, or is more than double, I'm sorry, than what Louisiana has in your youth population. Yet both states have just under 300 bed secure commitment beds. Neither North Carolina or Louisiana is currently operating at capacity in those facilities. Oh, sorry, guys. And then the last thing I want to The last thing I want to say is in North Carolina, similar to New York, this has not happened in Louisiana, but they have brought 100% of children who are under the age of 18 but charged as adults or sentenced as adults back under their juvenile justice systems. So I want to share this because I do want to acknowledge that Louisiana has, just like the rest of the country, reduced its reliance over the past decade or 15 years on carceral responses to children. But I think there's a lot of assumptions about young people, and Louisiana is still estimating under 70 children a year will end up in commitment in Louisiana. In North Carolina, they're expecting 250 children a year because of the kids in the adult system that they brought back and the fact that they brought 16 and 17-year-olds back. And you're still talking about a similar number of secure commitments in both states. So what that says to me is there's opportunities to invest that $26 million potentially in other parts of the continuum that exist outside of secure commitment. And there are ways to do that. So the first thing we recommended in our report was to treat children like children. So think about the individual child, their individual needs for rehabilitation. I think Ms. Porter spoke to this very eloquently earlier. It is not about punishment and continual punishment in the youth justice system. It really is about how do we get them the skills and services they need to get back on track. Second, look at that full continuum of care, right? We need to really look at community-based services. A lot of the programs that are offered in secure commitment are also offered in the community at a fraction of the cost with better outcomes. So I want to say that again, fraction of the cost, same services, better outcomes. And number three, establish guardrails that reduce which children can be sent to detention and other secure facilities. Dana went through that to talk quickly, but I'm sure that they'll talk about it in the PowerPoint that she shares and also in the report that we wrote. There are about 9 or 10 different things that states did to get ready, and I would include Louisiana absolutely in that, in terms of what you did to reduce over the past decade significantly the number of children that you were sending into secure commitment. And there's other things that can be done there, whether that's pretrial diversion that Dana talked about, building out your community-based mentoring or credible messaging programs, looking at your risk assessment tools when detention and commitment is necessary versus when it really should not be used, even if the child has high needs, and things along those lines. Again, there's more in the report because I know I'm on a time limit. And then the fourth one I do want to talk about, while we all know that in particular Black children are overrepresented on every point of the continuum nationally, this is true also in the Raise the Age states, there needs to be a very deliberate undertaking with a racial justice lens to ensure that young Black and Latino and tribal young people are not being pushed deeper in the system at a different rate than white children. That takes deliberate and intentional policies and strategies to ensure that that happens. So I just want to say this because we are at a point where most places across the country, we have dropped the number of secure commitments in this country by more than 60%. Many places have closed, but there is still room and opportunity to do better. And I think we really have to start asking different questions about how do we fill these beds. One thing I will say about North Carolina, they do not have any facility that's bigger than 24 beds. They are looking much more towards small, therapeutic, family-like settings. And those are the type of discussions we should be having about what are these alternatives. Utah has taken more than 200 beds offline, and they did extensive training with their staff, and the staff was very, very concerned that it had been in secure facilities, that it wasn't going to work. And their experience, now that they're back in community working with the same families, has been really, really positive. They're staying longer. Workman comp has gone down. Sick leave has gone down. And recidivism numbers are dropping even lower, even though some of these moderate risk children are now at home with wraparound services. So I just wanted to give that overview as a context, and I gotta stop sharing here. As a context, I'm happy to answer questions about this, but I just want to encourage Louisiana at this moment to stop and pause and make sure you're asking the right questions. One thing I will say, because you guys are pretty new to implementation, in states, even if they did have a temporary uptick in the number of young people that did go through detention as the system adjusted, within 3 years, almost exclusively those went down. Once the system kind of got used to it, judges started seeing older kids and adjusting their thinking around it. The numbers will go down. They will not continue to climb up. Or at least that's been the experience over the past decade. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Marcy. We really appreciate that presentation. I don't know if anyone has any questions at the moment that they'd like to ask Marcy. Okay. All right, is Savannah Felix on with us?
She's not. Unfortunately, she had an emergency come up and couldn't join us.
Okay, I didn't realize that she wasn't on. Okay. I'll just make a comment to Marcy's point about ensuring that Louisiana is asking the right questions. You know, one of my big takeaways with all of this, and I don't know if I've mentioned this to Bill yet, but I've certainly mentioned it to Gina, and I've just kind of been having this observation. I think I may have mentioned it towards the end of our tour at Bridge City. Said if you go, certainly in Orleans Parish, I can't speak for other parishes, but I assume in other parts of the state, we're seeing a lot of postings and billboards for job opportunities with OJJ, because it's hard to right now hire people who want to come and work for OJJ. So I think about that in comparison to the proposal for how we're going to spend this money and how that fits in. If we're having difficulty hiring people, but we're about to spend this money, how does that work? And that's something that I want to talk with OJJ about later in this meeting. But that's one of the questions that I have when you talk about how we're going forward. That's a question that I have, and I would like to further discuss. So, but again, Marcy, thank you for sharing that perspective with respect to raise the age and the impacts that you've seen it have nationwide and where we are here in Louisiana. So we have a portion of the agenda that talks a little bit about this idea of accountability. And I think we already kind of touched on it a little bit, but I just wanted to revisit that a little bit. And in doing that, I went back to the original statute that was passed and signed into law back in 2003, the statute that created this commission. And I think it's important for us to just to kind of revisit that, to understand where we are today and how we go forward, not as a commission that's there to just constantly tell OJJ, this is what you're doing wrong, but to figure out how we can be of best assistance and working in partnership with the state, with OJJ, and really all system actors, not just OJJ, but Department of Children and Family Services, the Children's Cabinet, and the youth planning boards, and identifying all of those pieces. How can this commission really be what it was designed to be? Because I don't think we're being that right now. In fact, I know we're not being that right now. So I'm pulling up my screen right now and talking just a little bit about what's in statute. And some of the language that stuck out to me from an accountability standpoint was obviously to make recommendations for improving juvenile justice, to propose legislation, resolutions, or other expressions of legislative intent, take any other action it deems appropriate relating to the restructuring or rendering of both of juvenile services, monitor and advocate for juvenile justice legislation or other actions relating to juvenile reform of juvenile justice, and the restructuring of the delivery of services to children and their families. The legislature hereby finds and declares that the creation of a single state entity for the delivery of services to children and their families would offer the states many benefits, okay? And they list out several benefits that was the intent behind the creation of this commission. So, you know, we have to be more creative in thinking about how we can utilize this commission to help deliver the services that these children so desperately need, rather than just continuing this cycle of when Ms. Woods shows up 5 years later, she's saying, well, she hasn't seen any changes. You know, we have to get away from that. And obviously I'm open to comments from other members of the commission and even anybody else who's willing to comment. But at the end of the day, I'm not interested in spending my time outside of session having these conversations, and we're not coming up with real solutions on dealing with these issues. So this is a commission that has to be serious about coming up with real policy recommendations, not just these broad concepts, but specific, really like concrete policy proposals, outside of just advocating for increased funding, but specific and clear policy proposals that we can introduce either administratively or legislatively to try to improve these conditions, because what we're doing right now just simply isn't working. So I just wanted to reemphasize that point, that this commission does have a very important role, and I think we have a very important opportunity to take advantage of. So I'll kick it to Gina, because I'm sure you have some additional thoughts. Anybody else who may want to follow up on that, but again, we're here to work in partnership with the agencies who are charged with delivering these services.
That's 100%. And I think from here on out, we should definitely make sure that the other three entities that the law touched, the reform law touched, should be here: the public welfare system, where it relates to the children's cabinet, the education system. I mean, everyone should hear what's happening on the back end when we don't do what we need to do on the front end. You know, it's clear from my vantage point that not enough has changed since we closed Tallulah and there were all these abusive practices. Folks are writing in the chat box, OJJ should be stepping young people down. Yes, and that should happen. And we want to see more of those things happening. We also want to see, as Ms. Porter pointed out, the opportunities to help her son were in existence. And if those services were available on the front end, her child would have probably not ended up in OJJ's custody. So it's just imperative that we stay focused holistically to make sure that young people, that we're creating the system and the vision that we first envisioned when we passed the law. But also, you know, right now we also have an opportunity, because it's clear from hearing and hearing about the escapes, hearing what Ms. Porter talked about, that OJJ is not in a position to care for our kids. If they're having to do a hiring practice, we have folks working in the system from the adult system. We heard Bill state that, you know, they're needing to hire bunches of staff. We're definitely doing our kids a disservice by continually sending them into OJJ if they're not prepared and able to provide the rehabilitative services. We've heard some staff did an interview on WGNO recently about the conditions and how unsafe it was for children as well as some of the workers. And so, like you said, Representative Duplessis, we have an opportunity to hold ourselves accountable, to make sure that we're thinking and rethinking how we're working this system. I saw Richard had his hands up, so I'll let him speak at this point.
I didn't want to interrupt you, Gina. I wanted you to finish whatever you needed to say, but I did want to follow up on a couple of things that you said, and I wanted to highlight a couple of things that Ms. Porter said, which is, especially with Ms. Porter, something she talked about is that her child had multiple hearings in front of the sentencing judge, in which OJJ recommended, I'm sorry, I don't recall exactly what she said. They may have recommended step down or release, and the court just didn't agree with it. Well, back in 2016, the legislature, at the same time it passed raise the age, passed this other legislative piece, which added mandatory post-dispositional hearings in certain cases, and those are found in Article 898 and in Article 906. And in the 5 years since that was passed, the purpose of it was to, if particular children who were put into OJJ custody, that courts can't just sentence a kid to OJJ custody and then forget about them. They have to bring them back periodically, review their case, review their sentence. For some of them, they have to have mandatory modification hearings to see if they're going to stay. And then also just periodic reviews, the purpose of which is to see if we can identify kids who were maybe given a long sentence years ago but can be released now. And I think to some extent that has worked. It has done that to some extent. But I think there are a lot of courts out there that aren't sure what to do with them, aren't necessarily doing them effectively. And I think this body could make some productive use of its time that it has meeting, trying to answer the question of, are courts using those hearings effectively to find children who can be released from custody, to find children who can be released off of probation, to do the things this legislation was meant to do.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to ask, because you mentioned the courts specifically, I will just ask that be included as a follow-up discussion that we can have with Justice Griffin, and I'm going to reach out to some of the judges at the juvenile judges across the state and talk with them as sort of, I don't know if we need to form a subcommittee or do whatever we have to do to dive deeper into that issue. Richard, I'm glad you raised that. I think that's something that we should more certainly dive more deeply into, to talk specifically with the juvenile judges across the state on implementing what you just discussed.
If I may follow up just a bit, I would suspect if you speak specifically to the juvenile judges, the ones in the 4 juvenile courts, those are probably among the judges who are making the most use of this. It's the ones that are hearing a divorce on Monday, right, and a review right, hearing on Tuesday, and a right, car accident case on Wednesday. Right. Those are the ones that you have to wonder, are they up on what this is supposed to be doing? Right.
Exactly. And can I just add again, this is why I think it's important that the Children, Youth, and Planning Boards exist in every jurisdiction, because if locally the judges are not adhering to the reforms, then they're going to send the young people into OJJ's custody. So this is definitely, like, we can't work in silos. It's important for our commission, and folks are talking about there's policy change and that needs to happen. We need to definitely, like to Richard's point, step young people down. I'll send the commission tomorrow. I've been working on a work plan for us so that we can clearly see where we're trying to go and the outputs that we're looking forward to having, and what we need to be doing as a commission to ensure those things happen. Because I'd hate for us to come to meetings and continue to talk, and then we all go back in our respective spaces, and then we don't come back again, until the next time, and we haven't really accomplished anything. So having a good work plan, so we know that what we're wanting to have accomplished, and then sending and strongly recommending to those entities that these are the things that need to happen. And so that makes me go back to when we had our first meeting and sent the letter to OJJ to request that they halt the building of the prison until we had an opportunity to meet. We gathered the information that this to rebuild was necessary, and we visited all the facilities, and those things haven't happened. And for some reason, but prior to the March meeting, the bonds were sold, and then excavation and what have you started. So I loved, and we were talking about accountability that was the accountability piece on the agenda from the commission, like what kinds of decisions can be made from our group and recommendations to the various entities that they go back and we're able to, get the reports that's necessary. Because I'm still kind of confused and frustrated that the grounds have been broken and the bonds were sold, which puts us in a precarious situation at this moment to figure out whether we need to rebuild this prison or not, or what can we do better with the funding. And from our vantage point and what I'm hearing and what we've been saying is OJJ isn't functioning as any better than when we started this process back in 2000. We're still hearing the very same stories, and young people are still returning home without rehabilitation. And so do we need another brick and mortar? We do not. We need qualified staff, and we need to have more community-based programs.
Thank you, Gina. I think that's probably the best segue possible to invite OJJ up. And I will just say this, I want to just try to kind of keep the conversation. I'll just kind of try to provide some structure in bringing us back to the discussion about the visit to Bridge City. Obviously, Mr. Summers was going to comment there. We asked that he hold his comments until the end of the meeting because we knew we would have a pretty robust conversation. We're not going to solve all of OJJ's problems on this call, but we're beginning to help identify those problems. Okay, so I would invite OJJ to share thoughts as it relates to the tour, and then we can segue into the most recent comments we heard specifically around the issue of accountability, and then the last part around Swanson and where we are with that in the future of that. And then I will just reiterate the concern that I raised, and I believe Marcy made a comment that this hiring is an issue across the country. So I don't think it's specific to Louisiana. I appreciate her pointing that out, but it still troubles me that I'm just trying to understand how we're going to effectively utilize this money that's slated for a new facility, and we're still having trouble hiring. That gives me some concern, and that's a conversation that I would like to continue to engage in. So with that, I'm going to be quiet, ask Bill to chime in, but also recognizing I'm gonna have to jump off in a few minutes. So Gina's gonna be taking over probably around 3:45ish, and we'll be following up after. So I'll jump off and let you go ahead, Mr. Summers.
Well, thank you for your time, Representative Duplessis, and I certainly don't have any issue with what anybody has said today. I just don't. Everybody has their own viewpoints and take on all of this, and going back to what I guess Ms. Woods and Justice Griffin and Mr. Pittman and especially Ms. Porter, everything that was said, we can do a whole lot better. And that's exactly what I've said since I've been here. And this has been kind of like catching the tiger by the tail, since I've been here, is we've been preaching accountability, responsibility, and commitment. And a lot of that, we take some big steps forward and then we fall flat. Going back to the, I guess, the tour. First of all, we appreciate everybody coming, and that is a time that you guys can see exactly, the way the facility is structured. There are some issues there, Representative Duplessis, you talk about light, and it is very difficult for rehabilitation, in my opinion, with a facility like that. It's hard. It's not built for the kids today. We talk about psychological type of things in regards to 2 points of light, natural light, being able to learn. And then some of these things, they don't look very appealing. And so I talk about that, and we talk about mental health services, we talk about VOTEC services, we talk about education, all the things that we talk about on a daily basis inside these facilities. We have been in such a crisis mode since I've been here in regards to staffing, critical staff issues, critical staff, that we had a long conversation just yesterday with our governor, with our chief of staff, with the commissioner of administration in regards to pay. And so there are a lot of things that we're doing that obviously that are not, at a public meeting. But as we talk about the trip, and I've heard everybody, or the people that have commented on what they could, I think is accurate. I think, that we should be doing a whole lot better than we are. And I do believe that's, that first of all, that's got to be on me as the secretary, here, that I don't know, but there's a lot of moving parts to this. And legislatively, when we talk about, building a new facility, well, this was in motion long before I got here. Long before I got here, and I've told you guys this. I don't know. I just look at a lot of the things that we're trying to do in a COVID environment still in regards to staff shortages, and getting the tools that we need to be able to have these kids become successful. Because somebody said it earlier, and I'm not sure who has said it, but it was echoed by several people, is that we need to make them better, or try to make them better when they get out, or better than when they came in, because we're the back end of the system. We catch the back end. We don't sentence, we don't prosecute, we don't arrest them, we defend them, but we catch the back end of this. I would love to be able to get out on that front end of the system. What Mrs. Mistrit, I think was what her name is. I'm not sure where she's from, but she talked about 4 points. About getting your kids the services they need, about ethnic and racial disparities, treating children like children. All of that stuff is that you try to do on a daily basis, whether it's in probation or whether it's in secure care, that they do more on at a local level than we do at the back end of the system. I certainly would love to be able to get with more community partners and being able to bring kids inside, or bring mentors and volunteers inside the facilities. But we can do that on the outside as well with the kids that we have on probation. But what we should be doing is stopping them from ever getting into the system. Is creating an environment across this state in regards to diversion, in regards to restorative justice. I think Gina talked about that kid with the firearm. Gina, I don't know what happened to him, but that's what I told Ivy, or the Director Miller, is that why not have a fireman come out and talk to the kids about, hey, this is what we have to do when that alarm is pulled, is that they've got to load up the truck, they've got to speed through all kinds of different things and be able to come out there, and maybe it takes root in the child's mind or the youth's mind. Those are the things we've got to get to. And it goes back to the ARC, philosophy that I've been preaching since I've been here: accountability, responsibility, commitment. And yeah, I said, building a facility in Monroe, maybe not being the thing that I would have been, standing in line to do. But when you look at that facility up there, it's old. it's over 100 years old and it needs to be replaced. And I'll shut up a bit and
Yeah, Bill,
take your
thank you.
questions. I'm
I'm
gonna be
sure
honest with everybody.
yeah, I'm sure there's definitely going to be questions, and I hate that right now. I have to jump, but I have to go pick up my daughter from daycare. Uh, but I would ask, that I think it would be helpful, certainly for me, and I think the commission, is as it relates to Swanson. Again, we've had a lot of conversations since I've gotten involved in this commission around that and what those children need, that old facility. Have any reports, or has anything been done, or has anything been produced to say this is why it needs to be built, other than, you know, just saying, okay, it's deplorable? I'm just thinking, just from an empirical data standpoint, a best practices standpoint, has anything been provided? We know that this decision was made before you came on board in this role, but has anything like that exist to suggest that, like, just to lay out from a data standpoint, why this is needed?
Well, Representative Pleasant, I can't answer that, to be honest with you, but I know it came from the legislative body. And I don't know if Beth's still on the call or not. Beth Morgan's been around for, 10 years or so, and she might be able to answer that. But I know that this came from the legislature.
Yeah, and I'll give a brief history, of where we came and where this started. I think it was probably in session in 2014 when we started. At that point, we had over 100 kids at Swanson, probably close to 150. And at Bridge City, we had close to, I think, 130. It originated back then. It was right then that we depopulated Jetson, because as a physical plant, it was suffering. It was built as on the incarceration model, on the correctional model. And we knew that we were not able to deliver a therapeutic treatment in that facility. So we had just broken ground, or getting ready to break ground, on Acadiana Center for Youth in Bunkie. And we made the decision to depopulate Jetson Center for Youth. Around that time, the legislature, and working with us, when they were looking at a lot of the expenses we had at some of the facilities, Swanson and Bridge City mainly, what we were, as stewards of the public dollar, the agency at that point said, we've got to house these kids. This is our statutory requirement. We need to look to the future of what that should look like. So taking into account the constant decrease in population that we've been in since 2003, that's whenever it was kind of like formulated. Actually, at one point it was formulated that there would be a new facility at Jetson, a new facility at Bridge City, and a new facility at Swanson, which would all be 72-bed facilities, playing into the regional model. So that's kind of where it started. It hit priority one, the design dollars to redesign Swanson, in fiscal year 15. So it's been around since then. There was a study in 2012 of the Jetson campus to compare, but done by an architect, an outside architect agency, to compare that current physical plant to the idea of having a whole new physical plant, and how that would look both construction-wise and operationally going forward, knowing that a smaller, more compact campus would take fewer staff. So not only, maybe there would be a little bit more spent on starting anew and building a whole new facility, but going forward, that would be made up operationally by the fact that you have a more compact campus, you have a smaller campus that takes fewer staff and fewer resources.
I'm sorry.
That's how it started.
Yeah, to interrupt you, but I also, like, those directives came from the former staff, the administration. And at this point, I feel like I've heard Bill say a couple of times, like, he's not necessarily a prison building guy, which we really appreciate. And it would seem that if he is calling for a report in a more rehabilitative situation, and there's really at this point not a need for a new prison, because again, we haven't seen a report that says otherwise. Bill can definitely say, I understand he's saying like this was here before him, but being in the lead position, I would think the governor would appreciate an analysis that would save us $26 million, and that it wouldn't necessarily be necessary. I don't know if Representative Duplessis ended and jumped off the call, but you know, I'd like to just make that statement. And I think he was saying before he left that in regards to a report, if there isn't a recent report based on new numbers and what's happening at this moment, I don't see why we would move forward to build an unnecessary facility without a report. And so, you know, I would offer to the commission to think about, you know, what is all has been stated. The main thing that we've heard today, and we should leave with, is that many of these children should not be in the system. And it's a failure on our part to allow this to continue, that young people do not get the services that are necessary because us as adults are not doing what, you know, we should be doing to rigorously rethink the system. And we'll never be able to put money on the front end if we keep putting money on the back end and building prisons. Like that, it just doesn't really even add up. If we are concerned about children, all children, right, that we would want to make sure that young people are not in the pipeline to prison. And that's what we're doing. And as Bill pointed out, he'd love to do more stuff on the front end. This is an opportunity to do that. Justice Griffin, do you have something to add? Look like you were gonna say something. So I would think that at this point, you know, again, we all know, I would love to see that we stop the rebuild at this point and work on doing a report, an adequate report before we move forward. And I know we can't vote at this moment, but as commission members, you know, we can definitely think more as we end this meeting. Mrs. Summers, you've stated, you know, you seem to have principles that you don't want to build prisons. I would say stand on your principles. We would stand behind you, and not do this. It's not a necessity. It's just not.
I guess I just want to make one comment on that, is that when you look at Swanson and you look at the environment, that we need to move forward and on that facility. And I don't know if it certainly wasn't not, you know, it didn't come from me, but I can tell you this, is that that facility needs to be replaced.
When we first were talking at the first meeting, you said if it was left up to me, I wouldn't build this prison.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure where we go from here. I will get back with Representative Duplessis and you know, and we're gonna just, I know there's a bunch of advocates. I see backgrounds saying no more prisons. We have young people on this call. We have parents and other advocates. And someone is saying we can close Swanson and send you to other facilities that aren't at a capacity. None of the prisons are at capacity at this point. From my FLIC background, to take off my JJRAIC hat and put on my FLIC hat, like I think thinking about what Richard pointed out, that young people needed to be stepped down. We definitely need to have our community, our local children, youth, and planning boards working with our judges so that they'll understand what's happening with reform, what's happening inside the prisons. I mean, I'm just appalled that, you know, again, we had 3 escape attempts and violence at Swanson. And I don't know, other commission members can jump in. I'd love if we have an emergency tour of Swanson, and that we could really hear from these young people in a non-threatening way, what's happening inside. And one other statement, and I'm gonna stop talking, and if no one else has anything else to say, I can close us out. But even your response about the young man that pulled the fire alarm, like, we should be asking why he would pull the fire alarm. You know, what would cause that? More so, like, I don't think a young person would put themselves in harm's way and pull the fire alarm, knowing the risk that would come, you know, behind that, if that person wasn't trying to send us a message. I remember when we were first doing the Close to Lula campaign and the tours were happening, young people were out putting themselves at risk to let us know that they're not getting the treatment that they need inside. And I want to work with you, Mr. Summers, and help you get the staff that you need. But I also definitely do not want to work in building this prison. And I'm going to stop here and see if we can hear from other commission members. If other commission members don't have anything to say, we definitely want to acknowledge the comments in the chat box in regards to building a facility based on a fiscal year 15 numbers is questionable. It doesn't seem to factor into the national or local trends of decarceration. Why hasn't OJJ partnered with local jurisdictions like other states? We know we went and toured in New Orleans. The detention center here is halfway, you know, it's not even to capacity. It's just a waste. And Mr. Nelson is saying we have to start with recognizing that these are our children. If we approach the system with the perspective that the goal is to give our children the very best, rehabilitation, not punishment. You don't take your child to the doctor to be punished. Thank you. That was definitely very well said. And those are the comments. We got the will of the people from our vantage point is not to rebuild the prison. And I think we just have to continue to talk about it. Do any other committee members have something that they want to share before we close out? Don't be shy. Okay, hearing none, I guess I can give people 4 minutes back to their day. And we'll just keep talking and be prepared for the next meeting. I'll work with Representative Duplessis to set the next meeting. Commission members, I'm working on the work plan to send out to everyone so we can see and we can take the recommendations. Mr. Pittman has stated action, being action oriented and having steps that we can take, figuring out how we can talk to the local judges to be able to make sure young people are able to step down. And I'm sorry, I took back a minute. So now we have 3 minutes back in our day. And with that, I will move to, well, we don't have to move to adjourn. I would say, have a good rest of the day, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, Gina.
Thanks to our friends who came and shared from other jurisdictions.